New videos every day.
Okay, I'm John Breeding, back with the truth about the psyche with Psychetruth, and I'm going to talk about stigma today. I've been really thinking about this subject, and it's going to take me a couple of videos to do this. So this is going to be a two-part thing on stigma. I'm going to feature particularly the ideas of Erving Goffman. This is a book that he published in 1963 called Stigma, and I really recommend the book. It's also interesting that the book came out shortly after Thomas Zott's famous 1961 book, The Myth of Mental Illness, because my focus will be on stigma related to psychiatry and so-called mental illness. I'm also going to feature a little bit the ideas of Philip Zimbardo in his new book, The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. Really good book and really good ideas, Philip Zimbardo. So we're going to talk about his work a little bit. And finally, my book, The Necessity of Madness and Unproductivity, Psychiatric Oppression or Human Transformation, is my personal work that has the most relevance for this subject. And that's available from Chipmunka Publishing. So, Goffman defines stigma as an attribute that is deeply discrediting. That's pretty straightforward. Let me go from there. I want to say right up front that there's a lot of confusion around this thing of stigma because groups like the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, NAMI, as well as the government agency that is set with a mandate to deal with the provision of mental health services in this country called SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, or whatever, that government agency, has a major initiative called Eliminating Barriers for Learning. Just as with other government initiatives, it's very important to decode the language so that we know the New Freedom Initiative is really the New Intrusion Initiative, or the No Freedom Initiative, pushing for universal mental health screening in this country, which really means mass marketing for big pharma. Similarly, eliminating barriers for learning really means eliminating barriers to people being labeled and getting the right treatment, which of course is pharmaceutical. Let's see how they define stigma. Stigma refers to a cluster of negative attitudes and beliefs that motivate the general public to fear, reject, avoid, and discriminate against people with mental illnesses. Okay, that feels kind of like that kind of rhetoric that's almost appealing. Of course, it operates with the primary premise or assumption that's snuck in there, which is that this mental illness is a real deal and a real problem. And we know, those of you who are listening to this hopefully and have heard some of my other videos and some of the other Psychetruth videos, know that mental illness is a metaphor that's made up, in that the assumption that the government pushes and that psychiatry and pharma pushes is that it's a biologically or genetically based defect. No scientific evidence of that. So that's slid in there. Stigma is not just a matter of using the wrong word or action. It's about disrespect. Okay, that's similar to the first to Goffman's definition. But it says it is the use of negative labels to identify a person living with mental illness. Well, how about a negative label like schizophrenic? In any event, it says stigma is a barrier. Fear of stigma and the resulting discrimination discourages individuals and their families from getting the help they need. Okay, let me read that last sentence again, because that's the key here. Fear of stigma and the resulting discrimination discourages individuals and their families from getting the help they need. SAMHSA wants to eliminate the barriers to getting the help they need. Well, that sounds pretty good, because we all need help at times, and it's nice to have that accessible and available. But in the context of our government and our current mental health system, what that means is a label and psychiatric drugs, 1, 2, 3, 4 or more. And of course the backup treatment is electroshock. That's very important to decode that. Fighting the stigma of mental illness means validating the label, making it an acceptable quote-unquote illness, so that it's no one's fault, it's not a moral failing, kind of like the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous disease model, right? But in this case, it just softens the dynamic so you'll accept your sickness and get the help you need. The real problem, as I've laid out elsewhere in terms of biological psychiatry, is that it validates the fraud, that biopsychiatry is a fraud. There is no physically or genetically based mental illness. There is no objective, identifiable physical or chemical abnormality. There's problems in living, there's troubles and troubling behavior. But these efforts to fight stigma really mean efforts to indoctrinate you and propagandize you and condition you to believe that mental illness is a brain disease, so you'll get the treatment you need, and that people accept that. The truth is it exactly stigmatizes. It tells you you are defective, you have a brain disease, you have a defect, and you can't do anything about it. So it strengthens and reinforces that you are defective. That's what Samsh's Eliminating Barriers is about. But the reality is stigma is not about being accepting of your stigma. It's not about being nice to people who are stigmatized. And that's what groups like Samsha and NAMI would have you believe. Accept your mental illness. Don't feel bad about it. It's not a bad thing. And be nice and considerate of people who have mentally ill. They're not really bad people and garbage and like that. Accept your disease and be nice to people who have this disease. But the truth is it goes way deeper, and that's where I'm going to take you for a few minutes in this conversation. The first thing is to think about language. Language is power, said Adrienne Rich. Language can be used as a means of changing reality. Believe me, you call somebody schizophrenic, you have changed reality. You call somebody ADHD, you have changed reality. Their perception of themselves and others' perception of them. Language is power. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The corruption of man is followed by the corruption of language. In due time, the fraud is manifest, and words lose all power to stimulate the understanding or the affections. Believe me, you call somebody a mentally ill label, and you don't understand what's really going on, and you don't have a real possibility for genuine empathy. It actually stimulates misunderstanding and disaffection. Again, one of my favorite teachers, Thomas Zotz. Psychiatric diagnoses are stigmatizing labels phrased to resemble medical diagnoses and applied to persons whose behavior annoys or offends others. That's a pretty good decoding of psychiatric labels and stigma, It's a euphemism, it's a phrasing that avoids the reality that this is annoying or disturbing, and I'm going to explain it by calling it a medical illness, even though it's not. Zotz also says psychiatric diagnoses are not descriptive. Rather, they are prescriptive. They don't really describe anything, they prescribe a course of action. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Perception. It's all about changing perception. There's a saying attributed to the Talmud. I've also heard it attributed to Anais Nin. I've actually got it in my book, Eyes Wide Open book. But it says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Our beliefs lead us to see and experience the world in a certain way. If I believe in brain disease, mental illness, and that's what I'm going to see. We see not only with our eyes, but with our ideas. And this is what we're talking about. I like what Peter Bregan said, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's a famous old saying, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Peter Bregan adds, mental illness is in the eye of the controller. It's not just about something that presumably resides in this person over there. It's about your relationship to that person. And that's where we go when we go a little bit deeper with this. We're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to go a little bit deeper into what this thing's really about in terms of relationship. For now, the message is, as Zott says, I'll go over that one again. Psychiatric diagnoses are stigmatizing labels phrased to resemble medical diagnoses. See, they sound like medical diagnoses. They're really a metaphor, and they're applied to persons whose behavior annoys or offends others. Let's go ahead and stop on part 1 here, and then we'll have another continuation in part 2.